The gunshot that shattered the evening silence wasn't meant for her. But Lily Northwood hit the ground anyway, her heart hammering against her ribs as dust filled her mouth and the acrid smell of gunpowder burned her nostrils. She had been walking back from the general store in Marfa, Texas, her arms full of supplies for the boarding house she ran with her aunt, when two men stumbled out of the saloon across the street, firing wildly at each other in a drunken rage. One bullet splintered the wooden post beside her head. Another shattered the window of the milliner's shop. The third found its mark, and one of the men crumpled to the dirt, blood spreading across his chest like spilled wine. Before Lily could scramble to her feet, strong hands gripped her shoulders and pulled her backward into the narrow alley between the apothecary and the land office. She opened her mouth to scream, but a low voice cut through her panic. "Easy now. I'm not going to hurt you. Just getting you out of the line of fire." Lily twisted around to see her rescuer. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek stones, gray-green and watchful. Dust covered his clothes and a worn leather vest hung open over a dark blue shirt. A single revolver rested in a holster at his hip, the grip polished smooth from use. His face was lean and angular with a day's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. When she met his gaze, something flickered there, concern mixed with a wariness that seemed bone deep. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough like he hadn't spoken in days. Lily shook her head, finding her voice. No, I'm fine, thank you." The street had erupted into chaos. People were running, shouting. The sheriff and his deputy came barreling out of the office 3 buildings down, their boots pounding the boardwalk. The man who had done the shooting was already fleeing, disappearing around the corner at the far end of town. The stranger released her shoulders and stepped back, putting a respectful distance between them. "You should get inside somewhere until things settle down." "I need to get these supplies home," Lily said, looking around frantically. The sack of flour had split when she'd hit the ground, leaving a white trail in the dust. The eggs were miraculously intact, though the paper they'd been wrapped in was torn. "My aunt will be worried." "Where do you live?" "The boarding house. 2 streets over, the blue one with the white porch." He bent down and began gathering her scattered purchases without another word, his movements efficient and practiced. Lily joined him, her hands still shaking slightly. Up close, she noticed the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, dark brown shot through with threads of lighter color from the sun. He smelled of horse and leather and something else, something clean like sage. "I can manage," she said, though she was grateful for the help. "I know you can." "Doesn't mean you should have to." He straightened, holding most of her supplies in his arms. "Lead the way." They walked quickly through the side streets, avoiding the main thoroughfare where the sheriff was now barking orders. Marfa was a small town, barely 3 years old in this summer of 1886, grown up around the railroad water stop and the cattle trails that ran north to the Kansas railheads. Most of the buildings were still raw lumber, not yet weathered silver by the desert sun. The boarding house where Lily lived with her Aunt Margaret was one of the older structures, built when the railroad first came through. Lily climbed the porch steps and held open the door. The stranger followed her inside, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. The interior was clean and simply furnished, with lace curtains at the windows and the smell of bread baking in the kitchen. "Lily, is that you?" Her aunt appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. Margaret Northwood was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with gray streaking through her brown hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes fixed on the stranger with instant suspicion. "Who is this?" "There was trouble in town, Aunt Margaret. Shooting. This man helped me get home safely." Margaret's expression softened slightly, though she still looked wary. "Set those things on the table, then, and thank you for looking after my niece." The stranger placed the supplies on the kitchen table with care, making sure nothing would roll off or spill. "It was nothing, madam. Just happened to be in the right place." "What's your name?" Lily asked, realizing she didn't know. He paused at the door, one hand on the frame. For a moment she thought he might not answer. Then he said, Kane Jackson." "Thank you, Mr. Jackson, truly." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that seemed almost old-fashioned, and then he was gone, his silhouette disappearing into the golden light of evening. Margaret crossed her arms over her chest. That was one of the Sullivan Ranch hands. "I've seen him in town before, though he keeps to himself. Doesn't drink, doesn't gamble from what I hear. Works hard and minds his own business." "He seemed kind," Lily said, watching through the window as Kane Jackson walked away, his stride long and unhurried. "Kind doesn't always mean safe, child. Remember that." But Lily couldn't stop thinking about him. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed under the eaves, listening to the coyotes singing in the hills, she replayed the moment his hands had gripped her shoulders, pulling her out of danger. The steadiness in his voice, the way he'd gathered her scattered supplies without being asked, as if helping was simply what a person did. She saw him again 3 days later at the general store. He was standing at the counter, speaking quietly with Mr. Henderson about an order of supplies for the ranch. Lily was sorting through bolts of fabric, looking for something suitable to make new curtains for the guest rooms, but her attention kept drifting to the tall cowboy across the store. As if sensing her gaze, Kane turned and their eyes met. Recognition flickered across his face, followed by what might have been the ghost of a smile. He said something to Mr. Henderson, then walked over to where she stood. "Miss Northwood, good to see you're well." "Thanks to you, Mr. Jackson." She was acutely aware of how close he was standing, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun. "Just Kane is fine. Did they catch the man who did the shooting?" "Not yet. Sheriff thinks he headed south toward the border." Kane's jaw tightened. "He'll come back eventually. They always do. Men like that think the world owes them something." There was a story behind those words, Lily sensed, a history that explained the wariness she'd seen in his eyes. Before she could ask, Mr. Henderson called from the counter, "Kane, your order's ready." "I should go." Kane touched his hat brim again, that same courteous gesture. "Take care, Miss Northwood." "Lily," she said impulsively. "Just Lily is fine." Something shifted in his expression, a softening that transformed his whole face. "Lily, then." She watched him leave, carrying 2 large crates as if they weighed nothing. Through the store window, she saw him load them onto a wagon hitched to a pair of sturdy horses. He swung up onto the seat with easy grace and gathered the reins, but before he drove away, he glanced back at the store. At her. Their eyes met for just a moment, and then he was guiding the horses down the dusty street. "That one's a hard worker," Mr. Henderson said, coming over to help her with the fabric. "Been at the Sullivan place for near about 6 months now. Showed up looking for work, and old man Sullivan hired him on the spot after seeing him handle a spooked horse. Best bronc rider they've got, from what I hear." "Does he have family around here?" Mr. Henderson shook his head. "Came from somewhere up north, I think. Colorado or maybe Wyoming. Doesn't talk much about his past, but he's honest and reliable. That's what counts out here." Lily selected a fabric with small blue flowers and paid for enough to make curtains for all 6 guest rooms. As she walked home, she found herself hoping she'd see Kane Jackson again soon. The next time she saw him was purely by accident, or perhaps by fate. She had taken the long way back from delivering mending to Mrs. Chen, the doctor's wife, enjoying the cooler air of early evening. The path took her past the small creek that ran along the eastern edge of town. Little more than a trickle this late in the summer, but still enough to support a line of cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade. Kane was there with his horse, a handsome bay gelding with a white blaze down its face. He had removed his hat and was washing his face and neck in the creek, the water running in rivulets down his tanned skin. The horse stood patiently nearby, already unsaddled, drinking from the creek. Lily knew she should walk on, that it was improper to interrupt a man at such a private moment, but her feet seemed to have other ideas. She must have made some sound because Kane looked up suddenly, water dripping from his hair. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Kane reached for his hat and put it on, a gesture that seemed defensive somehow, like he was putting armor back in place. "I'm sorry," Lily said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude. I was just walking home. No need to apologize. This isn't my creek." He grabbed his shirt from where it hung on a low branch and shrugged into it, his movements economical. "It's a public place." "Your horse is beautiful." Kane's expression eased. "His name is Ranger. Had him for 4 years now. He's got a steady temperament, good instincts." He ran a hand down the horse's neck with obvious affection. "Saved my life once when a rattlesnake spooked near my bedroll. He stomped it to death before it could strike. He must trust you." Trust goes both ways with horses. You can't force it, can only earn it. Kane glanced at her, then at the sky where the sun was sinking toward the western horizon. "It'll be dark soon. I should walk you back to town." "That's not necessary." "Maybe not, but I'd feel better knowing you got home safe." There are mountain lions in these hills, and they come down to the creek at dusk. Lily had lived in Marfa long enough to know he was right. "Then I'd appreciate the company." They walked side by side, Kane leading Ranger by the reins. The horse followed docilely, occasionally blowing air through his nostrils or shaking his mane. The evening air smelled of dust and creosote bush, and the faint sweetness of the last desert wildflowers clinging to life. "How long have you been in Marfa?" Kane asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Almost a year. I came to live with my aunt after my father passed away. He was a schoolteacher in San Antonio, but after he died, there was nothing keeping me there. Aunt Margaret offered me a place and I took it." "I'm sorry about your father." "Thank you. He was a good man. He taught me to read before I could even write my name, filled our house with books. He believed education was the key to everything." She smiled at the memory. "He would have liked it here, I think. The bigness of the sky, all that space." "What about your mother?" "She died when I was born." "It was always just father and me." Kane was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My mother died when I was young too. Fever took her. My father raised me and my brother on a ranch in Colorado until I was 17. "Is your father still there?" "No, he died 5 years ago. My brother took over the ranch." Something in his tone suggested there was more to that story, but Lily didn't press. They had reached the edge of town. Lights were beginning to glow in windows as families gathered for supper. Lily could see the boarding house ahead, its blue paint looking gray in the fading light. "Thank you for walking with me," she said. Kane's eyes held hers, and in the deepening dusk, they looked more green than gray. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Would you mind if I came calling sometime? Properly, I mean, with your aunt's permission." Lily's heart did something complicated in her chest. "I wouldn't mind at all." "Then I'll come by on Sunday afternoon if that's all right." "Sunday afternoon would be perfect." He smiled then, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look younger, less guarded. "Good night, Lily." "Good night, Kane." She watched him ride away, Ranger's hooves raising small puffs of dust. When she turned toward the house, she saw Aunt Margaret standing on the porch, arms crossed, but there was a knowing look on her face that wasn't entirely disapproving. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Lily spent Saturday cleaning the boarding house from top to bottom, much to her aunt's amusement. She washed and pressed her best dress, a pale green cotton with tiny pearl buttons down the front. She braided and re-braided her long brown hair 3 times before finally leaving it in a simple style that framed her face. Kane arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, riding Ranger and wearing clothes that looked freshly cleaned. He had shaved, and his hair was neatly combed. He tied the horse to the post out front and climbed the porch steps, his hat in his hands. Margaret answered his knock before Lily could get there. "Mr. Jackson, Mrs. Northwood, I was hoping I might take Miss Lily for a ride if you'd permit it. I'll have her back before dark." Margaret studied him with an intensity that would have made lesser men squirm. Finally, she said, "You keep her safe, and you treat her with respect." "Those are my conditions." "Yes, madam, you have my word." "Then I suppose it's all right. Lily, fetch your bonnet." Lily grabbed her bonnet and a shawl, her hands trembling slightly with excitement. Kane helped her up onto Ranger, then swung up behind her. The saddle was meant for one, so they sat close together, Lily acutely aware of the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength of his arms as he held the reins on either side of her. "Comfortable?" he asked quietly, his breath stirring her hair. "Yes," she managed, though comfortable wasn't quite the right word. Thrilled, nervous, exhilarated, those were closer to the truth. They rode out of town, heading west toward the hills that rose like ancient sentinels against the endless sky. The land here was harsh and beautiful, all scrub grass and stone and stubborn plants that had learned to survive with almost nothing. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermal currents. In the distance, a line of cattle moved across the landscape like a slow brown river. Kane guided Ranger to a spot where a cluster of rocks provided some shade and a view that stretched for miles. He dismounted first, then helped Lily down, his hands steady at her waist. For a moment they stood very close, and Lily thought he might kiss her, but he stepped back, always the gentleman. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," he said, gesturing to the rocks. "It's quiet, peaceful." They sat on the sun-warmed stone, watching the world spread out below them. Lily could see Marfa in the distance, a small collection of buildings dwarfed by the landscape. Beyond it, the railroad tracks cut a straight line toward the horizon. "Tell me about Colorado," Lily said. Kane was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. It was beautiful in a different way than this. Greener, with real mountains, not just hills. Snow in the winter that came up past your knees. The ranch was smaller than Sullivan's place, but it was ours, mine and my father's and my brother Travis's. We ran cattle, broke horses, did some farming. It was a good life. What made you leave? He picked up a small stone and turned it over in his fingers. My brother and I didn't see eye to eye on things after Father died. He wanted to expand, take on more debt to buy more land. I thought we should stay small, stay manageable. We argued about it constantly. Finally, I realized one of us had to go, and it made more sense for it to be me. Travis was the older brother. The ranch was his by rights. Do you miss it? Sometimes. But I don't regret leaving. A man can't live his whole life in his brother's shadow, always second-guessing every decision. Out here, I'm my own man. The work I do is mine. The mistakes I make are mine, and I answer to myself at the end of the day. Lily understood that in a way she hadn't expected. Wasn't that why she'd left San Antonio? To start fresh, to build a life that was hers and not just an echo of her father's. What about you? Kane asked. Do you miss San Antonio, not the city itself? I miss my father, but I can miss him anywhere. Here I have work that matters. I help my aunt run the boarding house. I do mending and sewing for people in town, and I'm teaching 3 children to read in the evenings. It's not what my father did, but it's something. It's useful. It's more than useful. Teaching children to read, that's a gift that lasts a lifetime. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Kane told her about breaking horses, the patience it required, the satisfaction of earning an animal's trust. Lily told him about the books she loved, the way stories could transport you to different worlds, different lives. He asked about her dreams, and she admitted she'd always wanted to travel, to see the ocean, to visit places she'd only read about. He confessed he'd like to have his own ranch someday. Nothing big, just enough land to raise good horses and maybe a small herd of cattle. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when Kane said reluctantly, "I should get you home. I promised your aunt I'd have you back before dark." They rode back to town in the gentle light of early evening, and this time, Lily let herself lean back against Kane's chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of him surrounding her. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down and walked her to the door. "Thank you for today," Lily said. "I had a wonderful time, so did I." Kane looked like he wanted to say more, but he just touched his hat brim and said, "Good night, Lily." "Good night, Kane." From that day forward, Sunday afternoons became theirs. Kane would ride into town, and they would spend the day together, sometimes riding out to his favorite spots in the hills, sometimes just walking through town or sitting on the boarding house porch talking. Margaret approved, grudgingly at first but with increasing warmth as she got to know Kane and saw how he treated her niece with genuine respect and affection. The other ranch hands teased Kane about his Sunday trips to town, but he didn't care. Lily had become the bright spot in his week, the thing he looked forward to through all the long days of hard work. He found himself saving up stories to tell her, noticing things he thought she'd find interesting, like the eagle's nest he'd spotted in a high cottonwood, or the way the desert transformed after a rain, suddenly erupting with flowers. Lily counted the days between Sundays, marking them off in her heart. She caught herself thinking about Kane at odd moments, wondering what he was doing, if he was thinking about her too. She found herself humming while she worked, much to her aunt's amusement. Summer faded into fall, and the relationship between Kane and Lily deepened. He kissed her for the first time in late October, under a sky so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. They had ridden out to watch the sunset, and as the last light faded and the stars began to emerge, Kane had cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "I'm falling in love with you," he whispered against her lips. "I think I have been since the moment I pulled you out of danger." "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered back, and it was true, so true it scared and thrilled her in equal measure. But as November arrived and the air turned cold, Kane began to seem distracted. He still came every Sunday, but there was a tension in him that hadn't been there before, a worry that shadowed his eyes. Finally, Lily couldn't stand it anymore. "Something is bothering you," she said as they sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the chill. "Please tell me what's wrong." Kane was silent for a long moment, staring out at the street. Then he said, "Old man Sullivan is selling the ranch. His health is failing and his son doesn't want to run it. They've got a buyer coming from back east, supposed to finalize the deal after the new year. I'll be out of a job come spring." Lily's heart sank. "What will you do?" "I don't know. There might be work at one of the other ranches, but most of them aren't hiring this time of year. I might have to move on, find work somewhere else." He turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes was stark. "I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave you." "Then don't. We'll figure something out." It's not that simple, Lily. I have to work. I have to eat. And I won't ask you to wait for me if I have to go, not knowing if or when I'll be able to come back. I would wait, she said fiercely. However long it took, I would wait. Kane pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. God, I love you, but I can't ask that of you. It wouldn't be fair. They held each other as the evening deepened into night, both of them trying not to think about the future that was rushing toward them like a runaway horse. The weeks that followed were bittersweet. Every moment together felt precious because they didn't know how many they had left. Kane came to town more often, making excuses to run errands so he could stop by the boarding house, even if just for a few minutes. Lily found reasons to walk past the Sullivan Ranch, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Winter settled over Marfa, cold and dry. The wind blew constantly, rattling the shutters and piling tumbleweeds against the buildings. Kane worked harder than ever, knowing his time at the ranch was limited, wanting to earn every penny he could before the sale went through. It was during one of those cold December nights that Kane realized he couldn't let Lily go. Not without a fight. Not without at least trying to build something that would let them stay together. He started asking around town, quietly, carefully. Was there any land for sale? Any work that might pay enough to eventually buy a small spread? Mr. Henderson at the general store mentioned that old widow Martinez had a section of land she might be willing to sell cheap. It wasn't much, mostly scrubland with a creek running through one corner, but it was something. Kane rode out to look at it on a gray afternoon when he should have been mending fences. The land was rough, no question about it, but it had potential. The creek meant water year-round. There was enough grass to support a small herd. With work, a lot of work, it could be something. He went to see Mrs. Martinez that evening. She was a tiny woman, bent with age, but her eyes were sharp. You want to buy my land, if the price is right, yes, madam. Why, you're just a ranch hand. What do you know about running your own place? I grew up on a ranch, madam. I know cattle, I know horses, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I've been saving my wages for years. It's not much, but it's a start. Mrs. Martinez studied him with those sharp eyes. There's a girl, isn't there, the one from the boarding house? Kane didn't bother denying it. Yes, madam. You want to marry her, more than anything. The old woman was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I'll sell you the land, but not for money. Not all of it, anyway. You pay me what you can now, and then you work off the rest. I need someone to fix the roof on my house, repair my fences, and chop wood for the winter. You do that work, and we'll call it even. Kane couldn't believe what he was hearing. You do that. My husband and I built a good life on nothing but determination and love. I'd like to think the land we worked so hard for will go to someone who understands that. She held out a gnarled hand. Do we have a deal? Kane shook her hand carefully, afraid he might hurt her. Yes, madam, thank you. You won't regret this. See that I don't. Kane spent every spare moment over the next few weeks working on Mrs. Martinez's property. He repaired her roof, fixed her fences, chopped enough wood to last her through 2 winters. He worked before dawn and after dark, sometimes by lantern light, driven by the dream of having something to offer Lily, a future they could build together. He didn't tell her what he was doing. He wanted it to be a surprise, wanted to be able to come to her with something concrete, not just dreams and promises. Christmas came, and Kane gave Lily a small silver locket that had belonged to his mother. Inside was a tiny photograph he'd had taken at the photography studio, his first and only photograph. Lily gave him a warm wool scarf she'd knitted herself, the stitches small and even, made with love and patience. They spent Christmas afternoon at the boarding house with Aunt Margaret, eating roast chicken and sweet potatoes and pie made from dried apples. It was simple and perfect, and Kane thought his heart might burst from the fullness of it. The day after Christmas, Mrs. Martinez signed over the deed to the land. Kane held the paper in his hands, barely able to believe it was real. He owned land. Not much, but it was his, free and clear. That night he couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk at the ranch, listening to the other hands snoring, and planned his future. He'd need to build a house, nothing fancy at first, just something solid and warm. He'd need to buy cattle, start building a herd. He'd need supplies, tools, 1,000 things. It would take years to build something substantial, but he could do it. With Lily beside him, he could do anything. The next Sunday, he asked her to ride out with him. She bundled up against the cold, and they rode Ranger through the winter landscape, the sky pale blue and cloudless. When they reached the section of land that was now his, Kane reined in the horse and dismounted, then helped Lily down. "I want to show you something," he said, his breath misting in the cold air. He walked her around the property, showing her the creek, the best spot for a house, the pasture where cattle could graze. Lily listened, looking confused, until finally she said, "Kane, whose land is this?" "Mine," he said, and he couldn't keep the pride out of his voice. "I bought it from Mrs. Martinez. Well, bought part of it and worked off the rest. It's not much, but it's a start." Lily stared at him, her eyes wide. "You bought land?" "I did, because I want to build something here. A ranch, a home, a life." He took both her hands in his heart pounding. "I want to build it with you, Lily, if you'll have me." He dropped to one knee, right there in the scrub grass and dust, and looked up at the woman he loved. "I don't have a ring yet, but I'll get you one, I promise. Lily Northwood, will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a cowboy with nothing but a piece of rough land and a dream?" Lily was crying, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling too, smiling so wide it looked like her face might split. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Kane surged to his feet and kissed her, and she kissed him back with all the love and joy in her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Kane said, "I'm going to build you the best life I can, Lily. I swear it." "We'll build it together," she said. "That's what love is, isn't it? Building something together." They told Aunt Margaret that evening, and she cried and hugged them both and said she'd known from the start that Kane was the right man for her niece. They set the wedding for early spring, after the Sullivan Ranch sale was final and Kane had officially left his position there. The months between their engagement and the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Kane started building a small house on his land, working every spare moment he had. Other ranch hands helped on their days off, drawn by Kane's determination and the promise of a good meal and a few drinks afterward. The house was simple, just 3 rooms, but it was solidly built with a good roof and real glass windows. Lily sewed curtains and quilts, preparing to make the little house a home. She worked with an energy born of happiness, singing as she stitched, dreaming of the life they would build. In March, just 3 weeks before the wedding, Kane finished his last day of work at the Sullivan Ranch. The other hands gave him a bottle of good whiskey and hearty handshakes, wishing him luck. Old man Sullivan, weak but still sharp-minded, called Kane into his office. "You're a good man, Jackson. Best hand I've had in years. If circumstances were different, I'd have kept you on until you were old and gray." "I appreciate that, sir. You've been fair to me." Sullivan reached into his desk and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This is for you. Call it a wedding present or a thank you for hard work or whatever you like." Kane opened the pouch and found $50 silver inside. It was a fortune, more money than he'd expected to save in 6 months of work. "Sir, I can't accept this." "You can and you will. Buy your bride something nice, or put it toward that herd you're planning. Either way, it's yours." Sullivan extended his hand. "I wish you and your lady all the happiness in the world." Kane shook his hand, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, sir, for everything." With the money from Sullivan and his own savings, Kane was able to buy 6 young heifers and a bull, the foundation of his herd. He also bought chickens, 2 pigs, and seeds for a garden. He purchased a cook stove for the house and a proper bed frame with a feather mattress. Every decision he made was with Lily in mind, trying to create a home she would love. The wedding took place on a bright April morning in the small church at the edge of town. Lily wore a dress of white muslin that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Kane wore a new black suit, the first suit he'd owned in his life, and boots polished to a high shine. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony. Half the town turned out to witness the union, including Mrs. Martinez, who sat in the front row with a satisfied look on her weathered face. When the preacher said, "You may kiss your bride," Kane gathered Lily into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness and passion that made several of the older women fan themselves. Lily kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and joy into that one perfect moment. They held the reception at the boarding house, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by everyone in town. There was music and dancing and laughter, and as the sun set and the stars came out, Kane and Lily slipped away, riding Ranger out to their new home. The little house looked beautiful in the moonlight. Kane had strung lanterns around the porch, and they glowed warm and welcoming. He dismounted and helped Lily down, then swept her up into his arms, making her laugh. "I believe there's a tradition about this," he said, carrying her over the threshold. "I believe you're right." He set her down gently in the main room, which served as kitchen, dining room, and sitting room all in one. The bedroom was through a door to the right, and a small room that could be used for storage or someday, they hoped, a nursery, was to the left. Lily looked around at the home Kane had built for her, at the curtains she had made hanging in the windows, at the furniture they had collected piece by piece, and she felt a wave of love so strong it nearly knocked her off her feet. "It's perfect," she said. "You're perfect." Kane pulled her close, his hands gentle on her waist. "I love you, Mrs. Jackson." "I love you too," she whispered, and then there were no more words, only the two of them, together at last, beginning the life they had dreamed of. The early days of their marriage were not easy. Building a ranch from nothing required backbreaking work from sunup to sundown. Kane worked the land, tended the cattle, made repairs, and did 100 other tasks that needed doing. Lily planted and tended a garden, cared for the chickens and pigs, cooked, cleaned, and took in sewing from people in town to bring in extra money. But they were happy. Bone tired at the end of each day, but happy. They would fall into bed at night and hold each other, too exhausted sometimes for anything but sleep, but content in the warmth of each other's presence. On Sundays, they rested, sitting on their porch and watching their land, small as it was, feeling the satisfaction of building something together. That summer was brutally hot, and a drought settled over the land like a curse. The creek on their property dwindled to a trickle. Cattle across the region began to die, and many of the smaller ranchers went under, selling their land for pennies and moving on. Kane and Lily survived by sheer determination. They hauled water from town in barrels, rationed every drop, kept their animals alive through the worst of it. Lily's garden withered despite her best efforts, but she didn't give up, watering by hand each evening, saving what she could. When the rains finally came in late September, Kane and Lily stood on their porch and watched the waterfall, holding each other and crying with relief. The drought had tested them, but they had endured. Their animals had survived, and their faith in each other had only grown stronger. That fall, Lily discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but hadn't been sure until the nausea and fatigue became undeniable. She told Kane one evening after supper, simply and directly, "I'm going to have a baby." Kane had been whittling a piece of wood by lamplight. At her words, his hands stilled. He looked up at her, his eyes wide. "A baby? Yes. Sometime next spring, I think." He set down his knife in the wood and crossed to her in 2 strides, kneeling in front of her chair and taking her hands. "Are you well? Are you happy about this?" "I'm very happy." "A little scared, but happy." "What about you?" "I'm terrified," he admitted. "But I'm happier than I've ever been in my life." He pressed his forehead to their clasped hands. "A baby, our baby." Lily ran her fingers through his hair, loving the feel of him, the solid reality of him. "We're going to be parents. I'm going to do everything I can to be a good father. I'm going to give our child everything I can." "I know you will. You're a good man, Kane Jackson, the best man I know." The pregnancy was not easy. Lily was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down. Kane worried constantly, but she reassured him this was normal, that it would pass. And eventually, it did. By December, she was feeling better, and her belly had begun to round with the life growing inside her. Kane became even more protective, if that was possible. He insisted she rest more, took on more of the household chores, and hovered like a mother hen. Lily found it endearing and exasperating in equal measure, but she loved him for it. Winter was milder that year, and they were better prepared. They had enough food stored, enough firewood chopped, enough money saved to see them through. Kane had sold 2 of their cattle at a good price, and the rest of the herd was healthy and growing. On a cold January night, Kane came into the house after checking on the animals and found Lily standing at the window, one hand pressed to her belly, staring out at the darkness. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Nothing's wrong. The baby is kicking." She reached for his hand and placed it on her belly. "Feel that?" Kane felt a strong thump against his palm, then another. His eyes filled with tears. "That's our child. That's our child," Lily agreed. They stood there together, feeling the baby move, and the moment was so perfect, so complete, that Kane thought his heart might burst. As winter gave way to spring, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Kane finished the small nursery, building a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth so there would be no rough edges to harm delicate skin. Lily sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small they were, how miraculous it was that a whole person would fit into them. Aunt Margaret came out to the ranch more frequently, bringing supplies and advice, making sure Lily was resting enough. She had arranged for the doctor to come when Lily's time arrived, though the doctor had warned them that he might not make it if the birth happened quickly. On a warm day in late April, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Lily's labor began. Kane rode to town at a gallop, fetching the doctor and Aunt Margaret, then rode back even faster, terrified of what he might find. But when he burst into the house, Lily was calm, walking slowly around the main room with Margaret supporting her. "The baby is coming," she said, smiling despite the obvious pain. "But not for a while yet. First babies take their time." The doctor arrived an hour later and confirmed that they had several hours to go, perhaps longer. Kane felt utterly useless. He heated water, fetched towels, and paced like a caged animal. The sound of Lily's pain, even though she tried to muffle it, nearly drove him mad. It was long after dark when the baby finally arrived, coming into the world with a lusty cry that made Kane's knees go weak with relief. The doctor worked efficiently, cutting the cord and cleaning the baby, while Aunt Margaret tended to Lily. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, wrapping the baby in a blanket and handing him to Kane. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Kane looked down at the tiny face, the impossibly small fingers, and fell in love all over again. "He's perfect," he breathed. "Let me see him," Lily said weakly from the bed. Kane carried the baby to her, placing him carefully in her arms. Lily looked down at their son, and tears streamed down her face. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." The baby had stopped crying and was staring up at his mother with unfocused eyes. Kane sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arms around both of them, and felt a completeness he hadn't known was possible. "What should we name him?" Lily asked. They had discussed names but hadn't settled on anything. Now, looking at his son, Kane said, "What about Samuel? It was my father's name. Samuel Jackson, I like that, Sam for short." Lily kissed the baby's forehead. "Welcome to the world, Samuel." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Sam was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he still needed feeding every few hours, day and night. Lily was tired constantly, but there was a glow about her, a contentment that came from holding her child. Kane helped as much as he could, taking Sam when Lily needed to rest, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, changing his diapers without complaint. The other ranchers teased him about being soft, doing women's work, but Kane didn't care. This was his son, his family, and he would do whatever was needed to care for them. As Sam grew, their life settled into a rhythm. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Kane's herd grew, and he gained a reputation for breeding good cattle and training reliable horses. Lily's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and extra to sell in town. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. When Sam was 2 years old, Lily became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier and she knew what to expect. Their daughter was born on a snowy December morning, smaller than Sam had been but just as healthy. They named her Rose, and she had her mother's eyes and her father's determination. Life with 2 children was chaotic, but Kane and Lily wouldn't have changed it for anything. Sam adored his little sister, even when she cried or grabbed his toys. Kane would come in from working the ranch to find his children playing on the floor while Lily cooked supper, and he would think about how far they had come from that day when he had pulled a frightened young woman out of danger in the street. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Sam started learning to ride at 4, sitting in front of his father on Ranger's saddle, holding the reins with Kane's hands steadying his. Rose was fearless, climbing everything she could reach and giving her parents gray hairs with her adventures. The ranch grew too. Kane bought more land when it became available, expanding their holdings. He hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Miguel who was honest and hardworking. The cattle herd numbered in the hundreds now, and Kane had developed a side business breeding and training horses. Through it all, Kane and Lily's love for each other never wavered. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when the children were asleep, sitting on their porch in the evening and talking about everything and nothing. They had arguments, of course, all couples did, but they always worked through them, always came back to the fundamental truth that they were stronger together than apart. When Sam was 8 and Rose was 6, Lily gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Daniel and Grace. The house suddenly felt very small with 4 children, so Kane began building an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the main room. Miguel helped, and some of the other ranchers pitched in on their days off, the way the community always came together when someone needed help. Aunt Margaret was a constant presence in their lives, beloved by her great-niece and great-nephews. She taught the children to bake, told them stories, and spoiled them shamelessly. When she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 72, The whole family mourned, but they were grateful for the years they had been given with her. Life was not without its challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, cattle lost to disease or predators, years when money was tight and every penny had to be stretched. But they always endured, always found a way through. Sam grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to work it alongside his father. Rose was clever and independent, with dreams of becoming a teacher like her grandfather had been. The twins were still young, but already showing their own distinct personalities. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kane and Lily stood on the porch of their expanded house and looked out at the land they had built together. The ranch was prosperous, the cattle healthy, the horses some of the best in the region. Their children were happy and thriving. It had been a good life, better than either of them had dared dream all those years ago. "You remember the day we met?" Lily asked, leaning against Kane's shoulder. "Every detail. You had flour dust on your nose and you looked so scared when those men started shooting. You saved me that day." Kane shook his head. "We saved each other. You gave me something to live for, a reason to put down roots and build something real. Before you, I was just drifting, working other people's ranches, living other people's dreams." "I love you," Lily said, the words as true now as they had been on their wedding day. "I will always love you. I love you too, more than I can ever say." They kissed, a gentle meeting of lips that held 20 years of love and partnership and shared history. When they broke apart, Rose was standing in the doorway making a face. "Really? You two are old. You're not supposed to kiss like that." Kane laughed and grabbed his daughter, pulling her into a hug despite her protests. "You're never too old to kiss the person you love." "That's right," Lily said, joining the embrace. "Someday you'll understand." Rose rolled her eyes but hugged them back, and Kane thought about how blessed they were. This was what life was meant to be. Not easy but full. Not perfect but real. Built on love and hard work and the commitment to face whatever came together. The years continued to pass. Sam married a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman named Emma who loved the ranch almost as much as he did. They built a house on the far end of the property and started their own family, giving Kane and Lily grandchildren to spoil. Rose did become a teacher, opening a small school in Marfa and teaching children to read and write, carrying on her grandfather's legacy. She married later, a newspaper editor from El Paso, and they divided their time between the two towns. The twins grew up and found their own paths. Daniel became a doctor, studying in San Antonio and then returning to practice in Marfa. Grace married a lawyer and moved to Dallas, though she visited often with her growing family. Kane and Lily grew old together, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled with age and work, but their love never diminishing. They still sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset, still finding new things to talk about after all these years. When Kane was 65, he finally retired from the active work of ranching, turning over the day-to-day operations to Sam while he took on an advisory role. He spent his days training horses, a gentler work that his aging body could handle, and spending time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and telling them stories of the old days. Lily continued to sew and garden, though she moved more slowly now. She also wrote down the story of her life with Kane, filling journal after journal with memories, wanting to preserve it all for future generations. On a warm evening in late spring, when Kane was 73 and Lily was 71, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red, painting the sky in colors that seemed impossible. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "We did all right, didn't we?" Kane said, his voice rough with age. Lily squeezed his hand, her grip still strong despite the arthritis that plagued her. "We did more than all right. We built a life, raised a family, created something that will last long after we're gone. What more could anyone ask for? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." Kane brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "Thank you, Lily, for saying yes that day, for taking a chance on a cowboy with nothing but a piece of rough land and a dream. You made all of this possible. We made it possible. Together." Lily rested her head on his shoulder, and they watched the sun sink below the horizon, watched the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. In that moment, surrounded by family, sitting on the porch of the home they had built together, Kane and Lily were completely content. They had faced hardships and celebrated triumphs, had raised children and welcomed grandchildren, had worked and loved and lived with everything they had. Their story had begun with a gunshot and a moment of danger, with a cowboy pulling a young woman to safety. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined, a love so deep and true that it had withstood every test, every challenge, every trial that life could throw at them. And now, in the twilight of their years, they could look back on it all with satisfaction and pride, knowing they had lived well, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The next morning, Lily woke before dawn as she always did, her internal clock set by decades of early rising. She reached for Kane, wanting to feel the warmth of him beside her, but his side of the bed was empty. That was unusual. Kane was not an early riser anymore, not like he had been in his youth. She rose and dressed, calling his name, but got no answer. A small knot of worry formed in her chest. She checked the kitchen, the sitting room, even the small office where Kane kept the ranch records. No sign of him. Finally, she went outside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool morning air. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, that deep blue-gray that comes before dawn. She walked around the house, calling for Kane, and then she saw the barn doors standing open. Relief flooded through her. Of course. One of the horses must have been ailing, or perhaps Kane had simply wanted to check on them. He had always been vigilant about the animals, unable to completely let go of that responsibility even in his old age. But as she approached the barn, the relief turned to something else, a cold fear that gripped her heart. She hurried inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. Ranger stood in his stall. The old horse was nearly as ancient as they were, retired from work years ago but kept on out of love and loyalty. And hanging over the side of Ranger's stall was a blanket, carefully folded. Lily's hands trembled as she picked up the blanket. It was the one Kane always used when he slept in the barn on cold nights to keep watch over a sick animal. But there were no sick animals. The horses were all healthy. "Kane," she called, her voice cracking. "Kane, where are you?" She searched the barn frantically, looking in every stall, every corner. And then she found him, sitting peacefully in the back stall, his back against the wall, his eyes closed. He looked like he was sleeping, so peaceful, so calm. But when she touched his hand, it was cold. "No," Lily whispered. "No, no, no. Kane, wake up. Please wake up." But he didn't wake up. He was gone, slipped away in the night, in the place he had always loved, surrounded by the horses he had spent a lifetime training and caring for. Lily sank down beside him, taking his cold hand in hers, and wept. Not tears of regret, because they had had a good life, a full life, with no words left unsaid, no love unexpressed. But tears of loss, of grief, of the pain of knowing she would have to face the days ahead without him. Sam found her there an hour later, still sitting beside his father, still holding his hand. He helped her up gently, his own face wet with tears, and held her while she cried. They buried Kane on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot where he could see everything he had built. The whole community came to pay their respects. The church was packed for the service, with people standing in the back and overflowing onto the steps outside. Person after person spoke of Kane's kindness, his integrity, his skill with horses, his devotion to his family. Lily listened to it all, grateful that others had seen the same qualities in Kane that she had loved, but wishing more than anything that he was still there beside her, holding her hand. After the funeral, life went on because it had to. Sam ran the ranch with the same care and dedication his father had shown. The grandchildren still came to visit, though now they came to comfort Lily, rather than to hear stories from both grandparents. Lily discovered the blanket she had found on Ranger's saddle was folded around something. When she unwrapped it carefully, she found Kane's journal, one she hadn't known he kept. Through her tears, she began to read. The entries spanned decades, short notes about daily life mixed with longer passages about his feelings, his hopes, his gratitude. But the most recent entry, written the night before he died, made her cry anew. "I am the luckiest man who ever lived. I have loved deeply and been loved in return. I have seen my children grow into fine adults and met my grandchildren. I have built something that will last beyond me. If I were to die tonight, I would die happy, knowing my life was full of meaning and love. Thank you, Lily, for saying yes to a cowboy with a dream. You made all of this possible." Lily closed the journal and held it to her chest, feeling Kane's presence in the words, in the memories, in the legacy they had created together. He was gone, but he was also still here, in every corner of the ranch, in the faces of their children and grandchildren, in the land itself. She lived for 7 more years, surrounded by family, continuing to garden and sew and write in her journals. She attended weddings and baptisms, welcomed more great-grandchildren, and dispensed wisdom and love in equal measure. When she died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, it was almost a relief to those who loved her. She had been fading since Kane's death, her spirit diminished without her other half. They buried her next to Kane on the hill, and at the funeral, Sam read from his mother's journals, sharing the story of how his parents had met, how they had fallen in love, how they had built a life together from nothing but determination and devotion. The ranch continued to thrive under Sam's management, passing eventually to his children and then to theirs. But in every generation, the story of Kane and Lily was told, a reminder of what love could build, of what was possible when two people committed to facing life together. The little house where they had started was preserved, turned into a kind of museum of their life together. Visitors could see the cradle Kane had built, the quilts Lily had sewn, the journals they had both kept. They could read the love letters Kane had written to Lily during the one winter he'd had to travel to Colorado to settle his brother's estate, and Lily's replies, full of longing and love and the promise of reunion. And on the hill where Kane and Lily were buried, a bench was placed so people could sit and look out over the ranch, over the land that had been transformed from scrubgrass and dreams into something solid and real and lasting. Their story became a legend in Marfa, told and retold, embellished and remembered. The cowboy who had pulled a young woman to safety and ended up finding his soulmate. The woman who had taken a chance on a man with nothing but determination and love to offer. Together, they had built not just a ranch but a dynasty, a family that stretched across generations. All of it rooted in that first moment when their hands had touched, when their eyes had met, when they had recognized in each other something precious and worth holding on to. Years after both of them were gone, a young couple struggling to make their own way would visit the ranch, would hear the story, would sit on the bench on the hill and look out at the land Kane and Lily had tamed. And they would feel hope rising in their chests, the belief that they too could build something lasting, something real, if they only loved each other enough and worked hard enough and never gave up. Because that was the true legacy of Kane and Lily Jackson. Not the land, not the cattle, not even the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood. Their legacy was the proof that love was not just a feeling but a choice, made new every day. That with love as a foundation, anything was possible. That two people with nothing but each other could build a life of meaning and purpose and joy. And so their story lived on, inspiration and comfort and hope to all who heard it. A reminder that even in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, even in the face of hardship and challenge and loss, love could not only survive but flourish, growing stronger with each passing year until it became something that would last forever, echoing down through the generations like a promise kept, like a dream fulfilled, like a prayer answered. In the end, that was what Kane had given Lily that first day when he pulled her out of danger. Not just safety in that moment, but the promise of a lifetime of love and partnership. And that was what Lily had given Kane when she said yes to his proposal on that windy patch of scrubland. Not just her hand in marriage, but her heart, her trust, her unwavering faith in the future they would build together. They had both kept their promises every day through good times and hard times, through joy and sorrow, through youth and middle age and into old age. They had kept their promises until death parted them. And even then, the love they had built continued on, living in their descendants in the land they had claimed, in the story that would be told for generations. The morning Lily found that folded blanket on Ranger's empty saddle at dawn, she had lost the love of her life. But she had also been left with the most precious gift, the knowledge that they had loved each other well and truly, that not a moment had been wasted, that their time together had been everything it should be. And in the years she lived after Kane's death, Lily held on to that knowledge, drawing strength from the memories, from the life they had created, from the love that had sustained them through everything. She knew that when her time came, she would go to him with no regrets, with nothing left unsaid, with a heart full of gratitude for the gift of their life together. That was the real story behind the blanket. Not just that a cowboy had chosen to sleep in the barn one last time, but that he had lived a life so full of love and purpose that when his time came, he could slip away peacefully, knowing he had done everything he set out to do. He had built the ranch he dreamed of. He had been a good husband, a good father, a good man. He had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. And Lily, finding that blanket at dawn, had understood all of this in an instant. The careful way it was folded, placed on the saddle like a message. Kane had known, somehow, that his time was near. He had gone to the barn not because something was wrong, but because it was his place, his sanctuary, the heart of the life he had built. And he had left the blanket for her to find, a final message that he loved her, that everything was all right, that she should not grieve too much, because they had been blessed beyond measure. In the years after Kane's death, whenever Lily felt lost or lonely, she would go to the barn and stand where she had found him. She would close her eyes and remember, not just that last morning, but all the mornings that had come before. Kane teaching Sam to ride. Kane gentling a spooked horse with nothing but patience and a soft voice. Kane coming in from a long day of work, tired but smiling when he saw her, and she would feel him there with her, not as a ghost but as a presence, a part of the very fabric of the place they had built together. The ranch was their love made manifest, every fence post and water trough and blade of grass a testament to their commitment, their partnership, their devotion. The blanket itself became a treasured family heirloom, passed down through the generations along with the story of what it meant. It was brought out at weddings, a symbol of enduring love. It was shown to children and grandchildren, a reminder of where they came from, of the strength and love that had founded their family. And every time someone folded that blanket, carefully and precisely the way Kane had folded it that last night, they thought about what it meant to love someone so completely that even in death, you tried to comfort them. They thought about what it meant to build a life with another person, to choose them every day, to work together toward a common dream. That was the lesson of Kane and Lily, the gift they left to future generations. Love was not just passion or romance, though they had had plenty of both. Love was also choice and commitment, and showing up every day to do the hard work of building a life together. Love was sacrifice and compromise and putting another person's needs alongside your own. Love was patience and forgiveness and the determination to weather every storm together. And when true love like that was found, when two people were lucky enough or blessed enough to find their perfect match, it created something that transcended the individuals involved. It created a legacy that would ripple outward, touching lives for generations, inspiring others to believe in love, to reach for it, to fight for it, to hold on to it with everything they had. That was what Kane and Lily had done. From that first moment when he pulled her to safety, through their courtship and marriage and the building of the ranch, through the raising of their children and the weathering of hardships, through growing old together and facing death, they had shown what love could be when it was given freely and received gratefully, when it was nurtured and protected and allowed to grow. And so their story did not end with Kane's death or even with Lily's. It lived on, woven into the very soul of the place they had created, echoing in the voices of their descendants, present in every sunset viewed from that hill where they lay buried side by side, their hands forever touching even in death the way they had touched in life. The ranch still stood, a testament to what two people with love and determination could build. The descendants of Kane and Lily still worked the land, still raised cattle and trained horses, still gathered on the porch of the old house to tell stories and remember. And sometimes, in the quiet of early morning when the world was still and peaceful, when the first light of dawn touched the hills and the land seemed to glow with promise, those who were sensitive to such things swore they could feel a presence. Two presences, actually, standing together on the hill, looking out over everything they had built, still holding hands, still in love, still together, because love like theirs did not end with death. It transcended death, becoming something eternal, something that would last as long as the land itself, as long as there were people to tell the story, as long as there were hearts that yearned for that kind of deep, true, lasting love. And that was the greatest gift Kane and Lily Jackson gave to the world, not just their children or their ranch or the business they built. Their greatest gift was the proof that such love existed, that it was possible, that it was worth striving for with every fiber of your being. All because a cowboy pulled a frightened young woman out of danger one evening in a dusty Texas town, and in her eyes, he saw his future. All because that young woman looked at her rough cowboy and saw not just a rescuer but a partner, a soulmate, a man worth building a life with. That was how it started. And this, all of this, the ranch and the family and the legacy and the love that continued on even after death, this was how it continued, forever and always, world without end.